You founded Aleph Capital in 2021, middle of COVID. What was the inspiration for that?
Negative oil prices, global pandemic, and our region stood out. And I felt like, well, I've done 20 years of investing, learning, making mistakes, seeing mistakes. If not now, then when, right?
Welcome to another episode of You're in Business. I am thrilled to say that we're joined by Huda El-Loeti, who is the CEO of Aleph Capital. Huda, thanks for making it to the program.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to being on your new show.
Thank you very much. So, talk to me about Omani coffee, Qahwa. How do you like yours, or maybe you don't even drink it?
I do drink it. I think the only coffee I drink is Arabic coffee, actually, with the tamar. I think the whole culture around it is more interesting than the coffee itself. But my favorite is the one with the strongest hail.
Okay. With sugar, without sugar?
No sugar.
Okay. Where in Oman are you from?
Muscat.
Okay. Do you go back a lot?
You know, not for a long time. I go every now and then, but family's kind of diaspora, so different parts of UK, etc. So don't go back as often, but every once in a while, yes.
I mean, I've been meaning to go, and I just can't make the time to get out there. And growing up in Riyadh, in sort of as a kid at school, they tell you about the turtles on the shorelines of Salalah along the beach. And so if you could tell somebody what is the place to go in Oman today, what would it be?
So the turtles are actually not Salalah. The turtles are Ras Al Had, which is the tip joining the Arabian Sea and Gulf, the Gulf of Oman. Then there is Salalah, which is gorgeous. When the rest of the Gulf is really hot around August, Salalah has beautiful weather, very super green. And Muscat itself has so much to visit, the Corniche, the mountains. Oman is, obviously I'm biased, but it's the most beautiful part to visit in the GCC.
You think it's going to see a renaissance now in the next couple of years with a sort of new team at the leadership?
Inshallah. I think there's a lot of will. There's a lot of commitment to re-energizing the economy, to improving the future outlook of the country. There's investment in infrastructure. There's investment in people. There is policy change that's happening on a continuous basis. Specific funding pockets have been created to energize businesses. So inshallah, that will all bear results.
So here's something I haven't shared before, and I'm going to share it here on this program. I reached out to you when you were the CIO of the Saudi food and beverage giant Savola, and you didn't respond to me. This was on LinkedIn. I messaged you. I'm like, hey, let's come on the show. I was with Bloomberg at the time, and you didn't respond to me. Can I ask you why you completely Is it because it's a listed company?
Yes, it's a listed company. Our communications and our dealings with media were highly regulated, as they should be. So anything we got that came from Bloomberg or any name like that would go straight to communication as well, up to them to respond or not.
But then in the end, you did accept my invitation. So thank you. And thank you for accepting the one for today.
No, thanks for reaching out. Love being, hosted by you. It's actually a privilege. So thank you. And yeah, I'm bound by, the policies of
Makes sense. Makes sense. One thing I want to talk about with you is what's happening in the world vis-a-vis DeepSeek. And it's just incredible because apparently this startup in China put out these models they're saying are better than the models in the United States when it comes to AI. And they're doing all of this at a fraction of the cost. Your reaction to that?
So look, I'm not a tech person, so I can't have a very educated reaction to that. I've seen the hype around it. I haven't even had the time to really delve in it properly. I downloaded it briefly. I'm an avid user, as we all have been, I think, for the past 24 months of ChatGPT, and it's been extremely useful in life, so long as you're aware of the pitfalls. I found the brief testing that I did, I found it quite interesting. It's very interactive, very easy to use. I refrain from opining beyond that, just because I don't know about the cost and the technology and how much of it is, imported capability versus not, how much of it will depend on what the US does, and what open source exactly means. I don't actually have an understanding of what they mean when they say open source.
But if you thought that AI was overhyped and overpriced, then this would be the real awakening. And it could shake up the technology order globally to its core. Or do you think that I'm going too far with that thought a little bit?
Honestly, AI has shaken up the world. There's a lot that gets done even in our day-to-day lives that we see impacted. So I think there's a lot, and there's a lot coming. Of course, if you reduce the cost so drastically, and it's in fact true that you can scale at this cost, then the ramifications of that can be very significant. I think what we often say, because what we do is something very small and mid-sized business investments when you focus on digital transformation. And the first question everyone asks me, do you very focus on AI? And I always tell people that, look, AI is a great tool, but AI is fed by information. Most businesses that we deal with, and even the bigger ones that I've dealt with, are not very good at capturing information or data in the first place. Without capturing data, without having that volume of data, AI cannot be very useful. So I think that you need to work on a lot of that. AI's capability potentially is great. And in certain environments where data is already being captured in a big way, reducing the cost, yes, amazing ramifications possible. But I think the world, companies, governments, institutions have a lot to do on the capturing data in the first place.
You founded Aleph Capital in 2021, middle of COVID. What was the inspiration for that? I mean, where did you get the idea for it? When did you say in the morning, it's like, hey, you know what? I really want to execute and deliver.
Well, the leadership of this region amidst COVID was probably the biggest inspiration. I was in 2021, I'm looking back at, negative oil prices, global pandemic, and our region stood out, shining colors, right? It was something to be awed at. And I felt like, well, I've done 20 years of investing, learning, making mistakes, seeing mistakes. If not now, then when, right? It really made sense to take that adversity and the reaction to adversity as a model to look at what we've done, and then take what I have learned to apply to this region, which looked like and continues to look like it has great prospects. So the inspiration was the region and the leadership of the region itself. The idea of establishing an asset manager in the alternative space was never far. It was always in the back of my mind, but I never wanted to do it for the sake of it. It had to be the right time with the right strategy. And that all kind of came together at that time.
Well, what's your AUM as of today? I mean, if that's the metric you use for success. I know you've had $250 million of commitments to one of your funds. Could you give us a bit more detail on that, if at all possible?
So not possible. We haven't closed our first fund yet, actually. So the AUM is not final. But I want to say, you said, is it a measure of success? I often tell people that success should, for somebody like Aleph or a firm like Aleph, should be measured when we start giving money back to people. Raising money is hard, but it's not a measure of success. Returning money is a measure of success. And inshallah, in several years from now, we will be talking about that.
You've picked Abu Dhabi for the base of Aleph Capital. This is in ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets. Why there and not anywhere else in the Gulf? I'm sure you do not have a shortage of proposals and bids to bring in.
There's no shortage of good places to be in the GCC, which is why our fund invests across the GCC. It is a region that encourages entrepreneurship, that supports fund managers. So yes, you're right. There's no shortage. That's why we chose ADGM. At the time that I started, I was looking for a well-established regulatory environment. ADGM does offer that. It's based on common law. The incentives that were potentially, not all were applicable to us by eventually, but it seemed like an interesting place to base ourselves. We were looking at the time actively at a lot of UAE companies as targets, so we decided to go down that route, and it's been a great journey with them as well.
How much dry powder do you have? Just to get a sense of, how active you're looking to be in 2025.
So look, like I said, we haven't closed our first fund yet. So that answer will depend on where we end up with the first fund. But we have only made 2 investments in our first fund, which is the Pet Shop and Sanipax Group. We would probably make another 6-7 investments in this fund. Combination our fund probably also co-invest. We look to deploy an average of 25 in any given investment.
How important was it to get a key Saudi investor on board? I mean, this is sort of a recent success for you, right? December 2024 with SVC. Could you tell us a bit more about that and sort of what it brings to the table?
So look, I think, first of all, that press release was a bit later than the funding. So the funding has been quite a bit longer than that. But if I take our journey I put pen to paper in 2021. We got incorporated in March of 22. Our fund was launched in June of 22. Right, so it's about 2 years. We got our anchor ADQ in that year. 23, we got Jeddah in, which is a fund of funds under PIF, Saudi investor as well. And in 24, we got SVC. These were the announcements that we made on some of our LPs. I think all of them are imperative for us to have. And these are the funding pockets that are enabling the private equity and venture capital ecosystem in the region, because it needed a catalyst. The private capital history in this region has been extremely limited, but the governments, these institutions understand the importance of the role of firms like ours as conduits of capital into the economy, because the government can invest in infrastructure, but it needs the money to make it to businesses as well, especially with the value add and the know-how, etc. So I think these institutions understand that, and their presence enables first-time managers like ourselves to start working, because otherwise, as we don't have dedicated emerging manager programs like the US does, for example, in the past.
I mean, you mentioned government investments, and I look at the note from Goldman Sachs, and they describe the $1 trillion of a CapEx supercycle with 73% of the capital infusion designated to fuel the non-oil economy all the way out to 2030. How successful do you believe the policies are going to be to continue to protect the momentum that the Saudi government has nurtured so far since they introduced the ambition of 2030? Because we're getting all very close to 2030. How do you think these next 5 years are going to be like?
I'm going to rewind a little bit to 2016, really beginning of 2016, when I had my offer from Savola. And I was debating it. And you have to remember, in 2016, a lot of what you see in today's Saudi was not there. And even though I spent a lot of time in and out of Saudi for many years, the idea of asking a female professional to move to Saudi was not the most straightforward thing in the world. But the opportunity looked compelling. I was debating it, and I got a forward. It was a PDF document, which was Vision 2030. And I opened this document, and it doesn't look like anything that came out of a government. It doesn't look like any of the budgets or vision documents that came out in the past. And I'm looking at something like, what is this very well thought out, technocratically led ambition that's being put out there? And it was a big driver of my accepting the job offer and actually moving to Saudi that year. Throughout my time at Savola, where I did what I do for a living for a long time, which is investing in portfolio managing and strategizing, but I also had added to my responsibilities investor relations. Doing investor relations for a publicly listed company in Saudi at that time, and at a time when I actually became part of the MSCI roadshow, because that inclusion was supposed to happen during that time as well. You spend a lot of time talking about people's views on Vision 2030 and how realistic it is and how much we would achieve it. And I remember sitting in investor conferences in New York and London and telling them that it's not about whether we achieve 10% or 30%, or it's the fact that there's this goal setting that's happening. There is this ambition that's creating this vision, really, that the word itself, that is changing the dynamic of what this country can do. Today, obviously, we've, I'll talk, one stat is well known, that Saudi is beat its female employment targets in Vision 2030 by a lot, and that's why they have been reset. Look, even in the 50% of the entire Vision 2030 is a very good place to be, but I think what's been shown so far is that a lot of it is very achievable. The activation of tourism sectors, the social change, all of those are very real. You visit Riyadh, so you've seen the...
Yes, and I was actually born and I spent the first few years of my life in Riyadh. So, I've seen the massive shift on every front in the kingdom. And sometimes I go back and I'm like, I can't believe this is where I used to live many years ago. It was very different. In the past, obviously, men and women were segregated at cafes and closed during prayer time, and no concerts, no cinemas, and so all that got those are big moves. But you still have to wonder about balancing the budget, right? And I look at what Ziad Dawood wrote from BE, and he makes clear they need $95 a barrel. We're nowhere near $95 a barrel for Brent crude. Is that something that worries you a little bit?
So look, I think it is always a race against oil price. I think the benefit we have is that there is a buoyancy in oil prices, not at 95, so there is a deficit, but there are initiatives to address those deficits. Privatization is part of it, and the debt capacity is there still today. So I think technically, there are ways to address a small deficit. If that becomes, oil goes back to 20 or something, obviously yes, that is worrying. But I think the underinvestment in oil and gas in the past decade and a half is giving some floor and buoyancy to oil price, which is what we as a region need to leverage and capitalize on to achieve that diversification. Now, it cannot be done simply by government investing, right? And I think that's what's important. There's a lot more that comes into it. That is talent development, there is FDI attraction, there's policy development. Most of those things are moving alongside, some slower than others. But I think that is, there's a level of commitment, and you saw it through COVID. It was not shaken by COVID that will benefit, I think will support us in getting there.
The other potential tailwind could come from the new administration of Donald Trump, Trump 2.0. You heard what the Saudi Crown Prince said about this. He said they're looking to invest $600 billion in the United States over the next 4 years. Maybe with a lot of caveats, but maybe it will lead as well to broader stability in the Middle East. Are you a believer in that scenario? You think there's more upside to come under this administration?
Look, I think that there is a lot of stability to come because the leadership in this region is in their foreign policy, in their views, has been economically led. They make decisions, whether it's relationships, whether it's investment. They're making decisions that are in the best interest of the long-term future of this region, and I think that's what's going to serve us well. And yes, I am extremely optimistic about it.
What's the biggest challenge from a private equity perspective for you in the region? Again, you've said you've done this for 20 years. Where are we today? What's the hardest bit?
So look, I think there are obviously fundraising is hard, but that's true for first-time manager anywhere in the world. And this last few years has been a difficult fundraising cycle, private equity in general. So that's always going to be there. And I think as you establish yourself and more private equity activity succeeds in the region, that will become better. But that's always, I think, there. That's not unique to us. I think what we find in the mid-market sector specifically as a big challenge is readiness of companies. Because you have to obviously do diligence on a company, look at their data, look at that information. That's often lacking or not well structured. And so we have to invest a lot of time in making that happen and finding the right companies. Underlying that is a broader challenge, which is the talent question. And I think we've become better and better at attracting talent in this region, but we also need to upskill existing talent. We need to get people more focused on rewarding talent. And then that leads to the, being better structured, being more aware of capital markets and equity options.
I was going to follow up actually on what it's like when you step into the boardroom of an individual company. And obviously you have a lot of different variables to play with, right? In terms of executive coaching to incentive optimization to diversity. So I mean, what do you find is sort of the not there?
It varies from company to company. I think incentive structures, and over the last 22 years, they've improved a lot. I remember in early days, if you partnered with somebody and said, let's give your CEO an LTIP or an ESOP, people will be like, why? They have a salary, right? It wasn't there. Today, people understand LTIP structures better. A lot of the listed companies have good structures. So I think that's getting better, but we definitely make it a priority to ensure that everyone who is running the business day to day is as incentivized as we are. There's nothing easier than making sure that the person who runs the business benefits when you benefit. If you can get that right, and it's not easy, incentives are hard and they can be, if you've already, I'm sure you have for economics, it's easy to get them wrong. But if you get that right, you've actually taken away a lot of the headache. So I think incentives is the big area. Alignment is the other one. You can't.
Alignment, you mean cultural alignment or alignment like if you
both
could
alignment and cultural alignment, both. Yeah. Goals and culture. And I think people underestimate that because in a transaction, people get into frenzy of doing a deal and getting over risk. But if you're not an advisor or a banker or a lawyer, the transaction is just a moment in time, right? It's all about the 4, 5, 6 years that you're going to be working with people. And in that context, you need to really be on the same page. Our transactions take long. We don't get transactions done in a month or 30 days. And if we did, I'd be very worried because we need to get to know the people we're working with. We need to get to know the businesses. We need to see the businesses through the period that we're working with them. And in that, you really understand what they're aiming for. You see whether because sometimes, on paper, it looks like you're aligned. But when you talk about things, you feel like, well, they're actually headed for a different direction than us. So I think that's dangerous. You should have alignment, and alignment, many times alignment is just backing the team in their plans. If they know what they're doing, it doesn't have to be and you shouldn't be forcing plans down management's throats. But I think those two things, incentives and alignment.
Which brands are you exceptionally proud of over the years that you've been involved in?
Which brands?
Yeah, which brands or companies? Yes.
Acıbadem in Turkey. That was one of the first $1 billion transactions in Turkey. I led that at a very junior stage in my career, but somehow ended up leading it and very, very proud of that. I think Entertainer was another one that was very good. I'm very proud of what we, the strategy and the reshift and the capital optimization work that we did at Savola. There's a lot of companies involved in that, but I'm very, very proud of that. And I learned a lot. And then there have been ones that I learned a lot on, but they're the opposite, where they didn't go so well, but you learn a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing I want to get your take on is Abraaj, which is a private equity giant, which was known all around the world and was based out of Dubai. I mean, you asked anybody from Tokyo to LA, everybody had heard of Abraaj, and they flexed their AUM like there was no tomorrow. In terms of the collapse that happened in 2018, you were with Abraaj at the time. And I'm wondering how it sort of affected you.
Yeah, I wasn't at Abraaj. I'd left Abraaj in 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how did the news hit you in any case? I mean, so I want to get in as a person who works in private equity, right? So this is still very much front line, right? In terms of the colossal impact that the collapse had. Could you run me through sort of your initial reaction at the time and how as well, the region has managed to recover?
Yeah. So look, I think it's a small number. So the bearing of Abraaj and private equity is probably more than it should have been because at the end of the day, it was one private equity firm, but it was a nascent asset class. For me, I was at the time at Savola, and it was tragic more than anything else. My first reaction was obviously to call any ex-colleagues and my ex-team members who were still there, see what's happening with them. But I think the one word that comes to mind is tragic, really. Because there was a lot. It was a pioneer in private equity in this market, many other emerging markets. It was a place I had spent a lot of time in, and we did have a lot of best-in-class practices. We learned a lot there, but this situation just muddied the entire water, regardless of the good and bad parts of it. I think that from a recovery point of view, I think people always ask this question, and I've always observed the exact same thing. Institutional investors, sophisticated investors don't take it to reflect the asset class because they understand, what it entails exactly. Sometimes smaller family offices, etc., they will ask questions like, "What about are all private equities like that?" But I've never found it outside of sort of dinner tables or conversations like that. People saying that it mars private equity. And I'm talking about people from the West, people from institutional investors are very clear on what happened, and it's more about what is the opportunity in this region than anything else.
I mean, to those who are looking at private equity today and thinking, hey, this is something I want to do because compensation's great. They believe people are getting paid well. A lot of them are. Obviously, not everybody is as successful. But in terms of the message to them, do you still support their decision to go into private equity? Are you like a lot of the lawyers I speak to, including my wife, will tell me, don't go into law. And I don't want anybody to go into law.
I can see that. Look, there's two questions there. One is, should you do join private equity industry in this region or not? And the other is, should you start a private equity firm or not, right? I think private equity has a lot of opportunity in this region just because it's an underserved asset class. You have to do a lot of hard work in terms of sourcing deals, working on them. Like we said earlier, it's not like in Europe, you find a business, they'll give you a business plan, they'll give you all their information. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of relationship management that's beyond what you might experience in other markets, but I still think it's an underserved asset class, and more talent should come to it. Starting a private equity firm and starting any firm and becoming an entrepreneur 3 years in, I'll say what almost entrepreneurs I've heard say throughout my life, which is, it looks a lot easier on the outside. Right? So it's very rewarding most days. But it's a lot of hard work. You talk about payday. That's in private equity is a long-term asset class that comes much, much later. But you have to sign up to a long time and a long term to be able to do it.
If you were not in private equity today, then what would you be doing?
Oh my God, that's a very difficult question. I don't know. It's been too long. I bet I probably would do either. I like, interiors and houses. Maybe I'd do something like that. Although I'm told that has its own stresses, but maybe that. But it's hard for me to step out of private equity because the private equity I've done has been sector agnostic. I've worked on hospitals. I worked in, marine businesses, retail, FMCG, and you are learning all the time. And all those businesses are interesting enough, stepped in and out of strategy for them. So I've done a lot of that. Any one of those things that are interesting for me, it's a challenge more so than the specifics.
In terms of your personal investment philosophy away from the boardroom, what kind of investor are you?
You mean not as Alip, but as Huda?
Yes, exactly.
I think this has become one. There is no, I actually stopped investing in anything personally because I just do Alip. Look, I think I have my investment philosophy in any realm is driven by people. Ultimately, you're investing in people because nobody can predict a COVID. Nobody can predict GFC. But what you can take a view on is how people will act in a scenario and whether they will act in the best interest of themselves, the company, all the stakeholders, ethically, unethically. These are the things that drive the uncertainty outcomes, and uncertainty is high. So my investment decisions are generally driven by people.
That's inspirational. What's the best piece of advice you've received along the way? You've had the chance to meet a lot of high-flying investors from around the globe. So is there anything that stuck with you? Maybe it's something more personal from your family growing up. What's the best bit of advice that you got?
I think the best piece of advice is to not underestimate or overestimate the opportunity.
Okay.
And I think that's exactly right.
This is a little bit of a lighter end to the segment. So what book last changed your thinking?
I'm not sure I can place one that I'm reading Elon Musk now, and that I think there's a lot of, when you see the stresses there, it really, I think it changes your view on what success looks like.
Okay. And if you could have coffee with anybody in the world today, who would it be?
Oh, very hard. Anyone of the...
Anybody.
Okay, I think between MBZ, MBR, and MBS, one of them would be amazing. Okay.
All right. We'll leave it there. Huda, thank you so much for taking the time and running us through all of that. So Huda Al-Nuwaiti, the CEO of Aleph Capital.
Thank you so much.